My name is Lauren Cohan, and I am 38 years old. I am a family therapist. I have spent the last 12 years sitting across from people in pain, helping them find language for things that previously had no words, teaching them how to name the dynamics that shaped them before they understood that dynamics even had names. The particular irony of this, that I chose this profession, that I am good at it, that it saved my life before I saved anyone else's, is not lost on me. When I was 26 years old, my parents told everyone at my cousin's wedding that I had stolen money from the family. I had not stolen anything. My sister Petra had taken $3,000 from the shared account my parents kept for family emergencies, and she had told them I took it, and they believed her without asking me a single question. I found out at the reception, from my aunt. My parents did not speak to me for 2 years. They did not come to my graduate school graduation. They returned my Christmas card unopened. When I called 9 times in the first month, then 6 times in the second, then twice in the third, and then not at all, my mother answered once in December of the first year and said, "We don't have anything to say to you until you're ready to apologize." Then she hung up. I had nothing to apologize for. Then 6 weeks ago, my sister Petra walked into my office as a self-referred client. She did not know it was my office, and I had to decide in about 4 seconds who I was going to be. But I need to start further back than that. I need to start at the beginning, because none of this makes sense without the architecture of the family I grew up in, and I am a therapist. I know better than anyone that you cannot understand a presenting problem without understanding the system that produced it. I grew up in a suburb of Minneapolis, the younger of 2 daughters. My parents, Robert and Helene, were both school teachers. My father taught high school history, my mother taught middle school English. They were not cruel people. I want to be clear about that because the story I am about to tell you is not a story about monsters. It is a story about a family that developed a very specific and very damaging pattern, the way families do, and then defended that pattern long after anyone should have. Petra is 3 years older than me. She was, from the beginning, the daughter my parents understood, not because she was smarter or kinder or more accomplished, but because she spoke their language. She was expressive and social and confident in a way that filled rooms, the way my mother filled rooms. She had opinions at the dinner table that my father engaged with as though they were interesting, which they were. She laughed easily. She made friends without apparent effort. She was the kind of person that adults describe as a joy, and they meant it, and they were not wrong. I was something different. I was the child who sat in the corner at parties and watched how people moved through spaces. I was interested in why people did the things they did. Even at 8, at 10, at 12, I was more interested in the question beneath the question than the surface conversation. This made me, to my family, difficult to read, and things that are difficult to read are, in certain families, treated as suspicious. When I was 10, I placed second in a state-level essay competition. My teacher had submitted my entry without telling me. The letter came to the school and my teacher called my mother, and I remember coming home that day to find my mother on the phone with Petra's school, discussing Petra's audition for a school play that was happening the following week. When my mother hung up, I showed her the letter. She read it and said, "That's wonderful, honey," and then said she needed to start dinner. I put the letter in my desk. It is probably still there, in the house I grew up in a drawer that no one has opened in 20 years. This was the pattern. Not that my achievements were punished, they were simply received into a kind of neutral absence. They did not produce warmth or curiosity or follow-up questions. Petra's achievements produced dinners and phone calls and the specific light that comes into a parent's face when they recognize themselves in someone. Mine produced "that's wonderful," and then the continuation of whatever was happening before. I do not say this to center myself as a tragic figure. I say it because it is the emotional ground on which everything that followed was built, and you need to understand the soil before you can understand what grows in it. By the time I was in college, I had developed a habit of self-sufficiency that looked, from the outside, like independence and looked, from the inside, like loneliness. I had 1 or 2 close friends. I studied psychology because I was genuinely compelled by it, because I had spent my entire childhood trying to understand the invisible forces that shaped people's behavior, and here was an entire discipline built around exactly that inquiry. I felt, for the first time, like I was in the right room. My parents did not entirely understand my major, but they were not opposed to it. My father thought it was soft. My mother thought it was interesting but impractical. Petra was studying business and had already done 2 internships by her junior year, which was the subject of considerable family conversation. I was studying human behavior and getting excellent grades in seminars that no one at family dinners could explain to their friends. I graduated and went directly into a master's program in counseling. My parents attended graduation, the undergraduate one, and did not attend the master's ceremony because Petra was getting married that summer and the wedding planning was consuming. I drove myself to my own master's graduation, sat in the ceremony, had dinner at a restaurant alone that evening because my friends from the program had families visiting. I ordered pasta and read a novel and told myself this was fine. It was fine. It was also very lonely. Petra's wedding was the following spring. I was a bridesmaid. I had helped with the planning because I am the kind of person who shows up, who does the logistical work without being asked, who sends the emails and confirms the vendors and drives the car when someone else needs to be in the passenger seat. I did all of it. I was happy for Petra, imperfectly, humanly happy, with the complicated sediment of a lifetime of comparison sitting under the happiness, but genuinely glad that she had found someone who looked at her the way her husband did. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found out that $3,000 was missing from my parents' emergency account. I found out because my mother mentioned it on the phone, worried, saying she wasn't sure what had happened and she was going to look into it. I did not know where the money had gone. I said so. I told her I hoped she figured it out. I offered to help if I could. The wedding was on a Saturday in June. Beautiful day. Outdoor ceremony, the kind that looks effortless and took 6 months to arrange. I was standing near the bar during the cocktail hour talking to my cousin Bev, when Bev's expression shifted into something I could not immediately parse. She said, "Lauren, I'm so sorry. I just heard about the money. I'm sure there's a misunderstanding." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Your parents have been telling people you took it." The grass was very green under my heels. There was a string quartet playing something that I still cannot hear without feeling sick. I stood there for a moment with the physical sensation that therapists call acute stress response, which I would later recognize clinically, but which, in the moment, simply felt like the world had become unreliable. I found my mother 20 minutes later, near the rose arbor. I asked her quietly whether she had been telling people I had taken money from the family account. She looked at me with an expression that was its own answer. "Petra told us what happened," she said. "If you have something to say for yourself." "I didn't take anything," I said. "Petra is lying." "Petra has no reason to lie." "Neither do I." She looked at me the way she had looked at me my entire life when I said things she did not want to examine, with a particular variety of patience that was really the absence of engagement. "This isn't the time or the place," she said. But they had already made it the time and the place. They had told people at a family event. The time and the place had been chosen before I knew there was a conversation happening. I drove home that night at 11 o'clock, still in my bridesmaid dress, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for 45 minutes. The radio was off. The engine was off. I sat there with the very specific understanding that something had shifted, and that this shift was not new. It was the oldest pattern of my life, compressed into its most brutal and public form. This was not the first time I had been blamed for something I did not do. It was the first time the blame had been announced to an audience. That was not new pain. That was original pain wearing a new face. I tried, in the weeks that followed, everything I could think of to correct the record. I called my parents 9 times in the first month, 3 calls to my mother, 3 to my father, 3 to their shared landline that they still maintained because my father was suspicious of cell phones. The first 2 of each went to voicemail. By the 4th call to my father's cell, it went straight to voicemail with a message that suggested he might have blocked my number. I sent 2 emails, detailed and calm, laying out what I knew, that I had not taken the money, that I had no access to that account independent of them, that Petra had both the access and the motive because she was in the middle of an expensive wedding year. I sent a letter, handwritten, because my mother had always valued handwritten correspondence. 3 pages, careful and honest and not angry, just true. I asked a mutual friend of my parents and mine, a woman named Helen who had known our family for 20 years, whether she might help facilitate a conversation. Helen tried. She called me afterward and said my parents had listened, and then said they were very sad about the situation and that they hoped I would come to them when I was ready to be honest. I was already being honest. What they had built over a lifetime of this pattern was a version of me that could absorb all available blame. I was the difficult one, the complicated one, the one who was harder to understand. So when Petra told them I had taken the money, they did not disbelieve her because the narrative fit. It fit the me they had always known, which was a me they had constructed without my participation, and it did not require evidence because evidence had never been the point. The point was the version, and the version was already there, and Petra simply wrote herself into it. The genius of it, and I use that word with reluctance, was that Petra didn't need to destroy me. She just needed to confirm what they already suspected. She needed them to believe I was capable of it, and they already believed that because they had spent 30 years building a story in which I was the one who required explanation. I did not break. I want to tell you that clearly, not because I need you to think I am strong, but because I think it matters. How a person survives the specific pain of being disbelieved by the people who were supposed to know them best. I did not break, but I came very close to a particular kind of dissolution that has no dramatic name. I stopped eating properly for about 6 weeks. I slept 10, 11 hours and woke up exhausted. I sat through my own therapy appointments. I was in personal therapy, as I have been most of my adult life, as I believe every therapist should be, and said very little for the first few sessions, which my therapist, a man named Dr. Robert Ashe, recognized as the silence of someone deciding whether they are allowed to be angry. He asked me one afternoon, "Are you waiting for permission to be furious?" I sat with that question for a long time. "Yes," I said. "From whom?" he said. I did not have an answer, which was of course the answer. I threw myself into my work with the specific, channeled energy of someone who has been told they are not worth believing and who has decided, quietly and without announcement, to build an irrefutable case for their own existence. I finished my clinical hours. I took on a caseload that challenged me. I worked under a supervisor named Dr. Margaret Ellis, who was 61 years old, had been practicing family therapy for 30 years, and had the kind of direct, warm attention that made you feel visible without feeling exposed. She became, over the years of my training, the mentor I had not known I needed, not a replacement for family, but something adjacent to it. Someone who had watched me work and could say, without flinching, what was true about what she saw. "You're exceptionally good at sitting with people who are in pain," she told me once at the end of a particularly hard supervision session. "Not because you're emotionally flat, because you've been in pain and you didn't leave." I held on to that. I hold on to it still. I established my practice. I built a caseload that was real and varied and demanding. I became, in the professional world I had constructed carefully and without my family's knowledge, a person with a reputation, not for brilliance exactly, but for steadiness. For the particular skill of being in a room with someone while they discovered something true about themselves and not flinching. My family did not know this. They knew I was a therapist in a general way, the way you know a fact without understanding its dimensions. They did not know that I had my own practice. They did not know about the awards I had received, modest professional ones, the kind that do not mean much outside your field but mean something to you because they are evidence. They did not know about my apartment, which I had furnished slowly and carefully over many years, or my cat, or my friendships, or the Tuesday night group dinner I hosted once a month with 4 people who had become my chosen family in every way that mattered. My parents and I had moved into a tentative surface-level contact after about 2 years of silence. My mother called on my birthday. My father sent a card at Christmas with a note that said simply, "We think about you." I did not raise the subject of the money. I did not defend myself. I let the surface be the surface because I had understood something important. Defending yourself to people who have already decided is a form of asking permission. And I had learned, in Dr. Ashe's office on a grey afternoon 4 years earlier, that I was done waiting for permission. Petra and I had no contact. Then, 6 weeks ago, on a Wednesday afternoon, my receptionist called through to say that a new client had arrived for a self-referred intake appointment. The client's name on the booking form was listed as P. Kovac. Petra's married name was Petra Kovac. I had known this. I had filed it in the category of things that exist but do not require action. I walked into my waiting room. She was sitting in the chair nearest the window, her coat still on, her bag on her lap in the posture of someone who is considering leaving. When she looked up and saw me, the blood left her face in a way that I have only seen described in fiction and had now seen in real life. She said my name. I said, "Hello, Petra." What followed were approximately 4 seconds in which both of us existed in the same space, with the full weight of the last 12 years between us. I felt in those 4 seconds a precise sequence of emotions that my training allowed me to identify even as I was experiencing them. Shock, fury, grief, professional responsibility, and something underneath all of it that I can only describe as recognition. The recognition of a moment that is going to matter, that you cannot avoid, that you have to meet clearly. I didn't know, she said. I looked up therapists who specialized in family dynamics and I didn't look at the photo. I know, I said, do you want to come in? She looked at me for a moment, then she said, is it okay if you? Ethically, I can't treat you, I said. We have a prior relationship, and the nature of it creates a conflict. But I can sit with you for a few minutes, and I can give you referrals for colleagues who do excellent work. She nodded, she followed me into my office. I want to be careful about what I share here, because even this conversation, even the parts of it that involved my own history, not hers, exists inside a professional context that I take seriously. What I can tell you is that Petra sat in the chair across from me, the chair where my clients sit, and she looked at the room, at my diplomas on the wall, my books arranged by category on the shelves, the small framed prints that clients sometimes comment on, and she understood in real time the distance between what she had believed about my life and what my life actually was. You built all of this, she said. Yes, I said. I told them you took the money, she said. It came out simply, without preamble, the way things come out when a person has been carrying them so long they are tired of the weight. I took the money. I told them it was you because I was scared and because, she stopped, because I knew they would believe me. The room was very quiet. The sound machine in the hallway hummed softly. I know, I said. You knew. I knew you took it, I said. I didn't know you would tell them it was me until it had already happened. She looked at me with the expression I have seen on many faces in this room, the expression of someone who has finally arrived at the thing they needed to say, and discovered that the person they needed to say it to has been waiting for a long time. I'm sorry, she said. I let that sit in the room for a moment. I let it exist without rushing to manage it or absorb it or dissolve it into reassurance. One of the things Dr. Ash taught me is that apologies deserve space. They should not be immediately reduced. I hear you, I said. That means something. It doesn't fix it, she said. No, I said, it doesn't. I gave her 3 referrals before she left, colleagues I trusted, all of whom specialized in areas that I understood, from the 4 seconds of seeing her in my waiting room, she would need. She took the paper I handed her and held it the way people hold things they are not sure they deserve. At the door she turned. Are you going to tell Mom and Dad? I thought about this. I'm going to give you the opportunity to tell them, I said. That's the right order for this. She left. I sat in my office for 20 minutes without moving, looking at the chair she had sat in. The afternoon light came through the blinds in the particular way it does in late autumn, cutting the room into bars of gold and shadow. My phone showed 2 missed calls from clients and 1 from my Tuesday dinner group about what to bring this week. I breathed. 2 weeks after Petra's visit, my mother called me. Not on my birthday, not at Christmas, on a Tuesday afternoon in November. She called and said, Petra told us. I said nothing. She came over on Sunday, my mother said. She told us she took the money, she told us what she said to us. A pause. Lauren, she stopped, I heard her breathing. We believed her, the first time, we believed her over you and we. I know, I said. I don't know how to. You don't have to figure it out right now, I said. This is not a conversation we can have in one phone call. No, she said, I know. I need you to understand something, I said. I kept my voice level, the same voice I use in my office, not because I was treating her as a client, but because it was the only voice I had that could hold everything I needed to say. This wasn't only about the money. It was about a pattern that existed long before the money. I need you to be willing to look at that pattern, both of you, before I'm willing to rebuild anything. The silence on the line was different from the silences I had been given before. Not cold, not the silence of someone waiting for me to take back something true, something more uncertain, something that contained perhaps the beginning of a question. Will you come home for Christmas? She said. I'm not asking you to come and pretend, I just want you there. I'll think about it. I said, that's the most honest thing I can give you right now. She said she understood. My father called the following evening. He said fewer words than my mother, but they were more careful words, chosen as my father chooses most things, slowly, with the precision of a man who teaches history and understands that getting facts wrong has consequences. He said, "I failed you." 3 words. He did not elaborate, and he did not need to. He said, "I'd like the chance to do better." I said, "I'd like that too. Let's see what it looks like." I went home for Christmas. It was not a comfortable evening. It was not a family portrait. It was 4 people sitting around a table that had a history in every scratch on its surface, trying to be honest with each other in the way that people try when they have realized, too late but not too late, that honesty is the only thing that produces anything real. Petra was there. She and I sat at opposite ends of the table and spoke carefully and directly and not warmly, because warmth is not something you perform back into existence. It is something you rebuild slowly, with the material of changed behavior. My father told a story at dinner about one of his students, a kid who had turned around a failing grade through sheer consistency, just kept showing up, kept doing the work. And in the middle of the story he looked at me and stopped and said, "That's what you did. You just kept doing the work." He said it plainly, not as a performance, not as a grand gesture of reconciliation, just as a fact he had finally seen. I let it land. I did not deflect it. I said, "Yes, I did." After dinner, while we were clearing the table, my mother stood beside me at the sink and said quietly, "I should have known you better. I should have made the effort to know you." "Yes," I said, "you should have." She flinched slightly. I did not soften it, because I am a therapist and I know that the truth, said clearly and without cruelty, is the only foundation on which anything real can be built. A therapist who offers false comfort is not providing comfort, they are delaying the work. That is the version of this I carry into my office every day. 4 plates on a table, imperfect food, my father's story about a student, my mother at the sink, Petra across the table doing the work of being in a room with consequences. It was not reconciliation. It was the beginning of something that might, over years, with consistent effort from everyone in that room, become something worth keeping. Here is what I know after 38 years of being this particular person in this particular family, and 12 years of sitting with other people in their particular families. Blame is a system. It distributes itself according to existing patterns, and it requires someone to carry it. I was the carrier in my family because I was quieter, because I was harder to read, because the question of who I was never interested them as much as the question of who Petra was. That is not a moral failing in me. It is a structural failure in them. And structural failures, as any engineer will tell you, and I think of Naomi Watts wherever she is and her bridges, do not correct themselves. They require someone to examine the load and redistribute it deliberately. I stopped defending myself years before Petra walked into my waiting room. I stopped because I understood that defense is a response to a question, and the question my parents were asking, "Did you do it?" was never actually the question. The actual question was, "Who are you?" And to that question, defense is useless. To that question, the only answer is, keep building, keep doing the work. Let the structure speak for itself. My name is Lauren Cohan. I am 38 years old. I am a family therapist, and I built my practice in the years my family was not watching, and it is real and it holds. If you are reading this because something in it sounds like your life, if you have been the one who absorbs the blame, who defends and explains and apologizes for things you did not do, who has watched the story your family tells about you calcify into something you no longer recognize as yourself, I want to tell you what I had to learn in the hard, slow way. You are not required to correct their version of you, you are required to know your own. The truth does not expire, it does not get tired, it does not need you to repeat it constantly to stay true. Say it once clearly to anyone who is actually listening, then go build the thing you are here to build. The evidence accumulates, it always does. And one day on a Wednesday afternoon, the person who needed you to be small will walk into the room you built and understand, without you having to say a single word, exactly who you became while they were looking away. 4 plates at a table, a father's quiet acknowledgement, a mother at the sink saying what is true. It is not everything, but it is the first true thing we have had in years. That is enough to begin.